Sir, shall we start, sir?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, Raghunandan.
Good evening, members. A warm welcome to today's session. Today with us, we have our speaker, Revati ma'am, and our ex-officio member, Changareddy sir, and today's guest of honor, Ranjit sir with us. Now I request our past chairman, Sivaram sir, to hand over the proceedings. Sir, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Raghu. Good evening to members. I once again welcome to the today's CP seminar on pre-package insolvency resolution profession. On behalf of Guntur branch, I welcome to the ex-officio Changareddy Garu and today's chief guest C.A. Ranjit Garu, past chairman Guntur branch, and today's speaker C.A. Revati Raghunandan Garu, treasurer of SIRC. Today's topic is very important topic, and I request all the members to utilize the maximum for this seminar. Insolvency professions, whoever attended the seminar. Before start the chief guest wordings, I request ex-officio SIRC member Changareddy Garu to give a opening remarks about the today's seminar. Over to you, Changareddy Garu.
Thank you, Sivaram Krishna Garu. My colleague in Regional Council and Treasurer of SIRC of ICI and IBC Committee Chairman, Madam C.A. Revati Raghunandan Garu, and today's chief guest, I think our past Chairman, Ranjit Kumar sir, in absence, our Chairman of Guntur branch, General Gada Srinivas Rao, past Chairman Sivaram Krishna, and Chinta Raghunandan, who is great supporter for Guntur branch for all the technical support, and the past chairmen, senior members, my dear friends who joined to this today virtual webinar. A pleasant good evening to each one of you. I deem it a great privilege to join this virtual webinar and part of this program organized and hosted by Guntur branch of SIRC of ICI. On behalf of Guntur branch, I extend warm welcome to the treasurer of SIRC of ICI, Madam C.A. Revati Raghunandan. I think today's topic is a very, very important topic. There are a broad range of opportunities that arise from corporate insolvency and financial restructuring. Normally, we chartered accountants would find a strong character with the strong characters and requirements due to our deep understanding of the financial aspects of an enterprise operations and its implications. We have the ability to do the even insolvency also. It may have been observed that which an increasing number of CRPs finding their way to resolution through the M&A takeover. The IP needs to have the ability to prepare a detailed information memorandum, that is IMI called, often with the help of financial consultants along with other related professionals. The target companies not only have to undergo deep and incisive due diligence by teams from the prospective acquirers, but also the transaction structure must be devised and validated by lawyers, accountants, and examined from the regulatory aspects. To achieve all this within the prescribed time limit, the MOUs and definitive documents will have to be prepared at all stages of the transactions well before the proposed M&A and takeover. Again, as a chartered accountant, particularly those with exposure to investment banking and merchant banking functions would be well equipped to take the lead in these areas. The awaited rollout of the insolvency law relating to cross-border defaults is also expected to provide a new avenue for the insolvency professionals. Recently, the Parliamentary Standing Committee appointed to examine the workings of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, and they have recommended a few amendments to the present system, including threshold rate of cutoff for the creditors below certain prescribed percentages. And it has also recommended a new supervisory body to oversee resolution professionals and suggested that only High Courts judges to be appointed to the National Company Law Tribunal to ensure the quicker disposal of the cases. So there are a couple of interesting changes which we need to keep in mind. I think today eminent resource person, Madam C. Revati Raghunandan Garu, having vast experience in dealing with the IBC cases, particularly from, I think, from 2016 onwards. She will explain what are all the intricacies the members need to keep in mind. With this, my compliments to the chairman for organizing this today's virtual webinar on insolvency professional package. I think today with us our past chairman Ranjit Kumar sir. He will give the overview and tips to all the participants. With this, my compliments to the entire team of Guntur branch. And once again, I welcome Ma'am Revati Raghunathan Garu for the Guntur branch. Thank you, madam. Thank you very much. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you, Sengal Reddy garu. Thank you. Before speaking today's chief guest, CA Ranjit Garu, I myself introduce today's chief guest Ranjit Garu. CA Kombination Ranjit Kumar Garu is a practicing chartered accountant from the past 32 years as a senior partner of Messrs. Ranjit and Associates Guntur. He has worked as a chairman of Guntur branch of SRC during the year 2003-2004. He has also served as a professional director in the Guntur District Cooperative Central Bank. He is one of the resource persons in Guntur branch. He also presented various papers on taxation and GST matters. He has expertise in real estate and construction related tax matters. With this brief details, I welcome to the today's chief guest, CA Ranjit Kumar Garu. Ranjit Garu, over to you.
Thank you, Shivaram Krishna, for your introduction about me. And very good evening to the members, Sengal Reddy Garu, Madam Revati Raghunathan Garu, and our branch member, Mr. C. Raghunathan, and to other members, Mr. Venkat Reddy, who is in viewers. A good evening. And I think it is the right time for us to have a discussion on this subject. Since in the August, the government has notified the insolvency and the bankruptcy code, giving the effect of the ordinance promulgated in April this year. Because of the stress being faced by the MSMEs and all the other sectors, the insolvency, the process has become more and more important. Earlier, we used to say, ours is a non-metro area. These are the subjects not relevant to us. But now, I will explain how this is relevant for even in our area, even in the small towns also. The reasons for the stress of the any industry and MSMEs are like these pandemics. Present, we are facing the COVID pandemic, and also the changes in the government priorities. We would like to say, whenever a government changes, their priorities are being changed. Particularly in our state, we are with a new era in the government. The capitals are shifted to another place. Now the existing real estate and the construction activity, the projects on hand are being at a standstill position. Now, I do hope that there is a vast scope for this insolvency process in the coming 2 to 3 years in our Guntur area. Because of the changing in the priorities of the governments and the new regimes, the situation is becoming like this. Moreover, since the levelization process in the economy, the business has entered into a global village concept. Now, we have seen last 2 or 3 days, the Afghanistan episode or like anything. The international ramifications are also affecting the business and the trades in small areas also, whether it is a national level or at a state level or even at a district level also. And moreover, due to the rapid change in the technology also, the change in the rapid change in the technology is outdating the existing systems, thereby affecting some of the MSMEs in a short span. Moreover, least to say, some financial indiscipline and the diversion of the funds are also causing the stress to the businesses and leading to the bankruptcy process in this. Now, this new pre-packed this resolution process has given some advantages than the corporate insolvency resolution process. I think now the benchmark, this one is, I think it is set as 1 lakh rupees and maybe extended to 1 crore by the government by way of a special notification. very small amount of failure of 1 lakh rupees may lead to the initiation of the process by the creditors like that. This is somewhat look into. Maybe this 1 lakh is very, very minimum amount which should be upscaled by the government before it is coming into the process. The earlier the CRP, the time duration is, I think it is, madam, 270 days for processing. Now in this pre-pack system, it has come down to 120 days, which will be making facilitation for a easy and earlier completion of the process, thereby leads to the earlier resolution. No, as per the bill, I think the bill has taken care of the interests of both the parties, creditors as well as the promoters also. And it is also having the safeguard measures for not to be deceived by the promoters by any techniques and all the things. I think all these matters maybe it is better to madam will get all these matters in detail so that we will have a knowledge about the new one. Since this is the very, very new pronouncement, we will have a sufficient knowledge can be gained from madam. Now I would like to hear from madam about this subject. Thank you for giving this opportunity.
Thank you, Ranjit Garu. Thank you for your words. Before starting the session, I request SICASA Chairman Raghunandan to introduce today's speaker, Madam Revati Raghunandan.
Good evening,
Over
members.
to you.
Sir, thank you, sir. Good evening, members. Today's speaker of the session, Revati ma'am, is a senior partner at ARCO. Revati Raghunandan ma'am has 25 years experience in practice, consulting and teaching. She is an FCA, CISA, CSTM, IP and FAFD. She is also a qualified independent director and empaneled with IICA. She is a treasurer of SIRC for the year 21-22. She is a chairperson of Committee of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code of Valuation Standards and Committee on Capital Markets and Investor Protection for the year 21-22. She is in the managing committee member of the Hindustan Chamber of Commerce, chairperson of Committee of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code and Valuation Standards and CPE Committee 2021, member Regional Audit Committee of SIRC 2021, former chairperson of SICASA and Students Committee for the year 1920, member of Managing Committee for Society of Auditors 2017-18. She has addressed various forums on insolvency and bankruptcy code and practice, co-authored Finance and Facilities for Exporters, writer for professional magazines, technical reviewer of the Shield Panel, a subcommittee of the Research Committee of ICAI for review of annual reports and other documents for excellence in financial reporting. She is also a visiting professor for direct and indirect taxes at Indo-German Training Center and faculty for direct taxes with MSME. She is a jury member of the Abhinami Small Budget Film Awards 2013 and 2012. With this, I welcome today's speaker, Revati ma'am, for the Guntur branch and address the gathering. Ma'am, over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much for those nice words. Thank you very much, my colleague in the council, Chengal Reddy sir, for actually inviting me to address the Guntur branch. It is always a great pleasure to come to Guntur, if not physically, at least virtually. And thank you very much, Sir Ranjit Kumar sir, for those lovely opening remarks, and Sivarama sir for the introduction, and Raghunandan also for the introduction. Very good evening to all the members. When I was talking with Chengal Reddy Garu sometime back about insolvency, and he asked whether I could do a session, I was actually wondering what part of it can interest professional colleagues, because I think insolvency is something which all of us are hearing about day in and day out. And one more, it's rather like, teaching the taught already about what they are all familiar with. PPIRP, the pre-packaged insolvency, which has been introduced by the government, and in fact, it was notified only on August 11th or 12th. It has got the parliamentary assent also. So it's going to it's going to open up a lot of opportunities for us as professionals, and not only as an insolvency professional, but also as a chartered accountant, because we can give advisory to our clients as to how to resolve the financial distress which they are facing due to this pandemic, which is prolonged for so long and which has hit the economy across the globe in a very bad manner, and especially in our country, which is predominantly with the corporate sector, is predominantly by the MSME. So PPIRP is something which is of great need in our country, and I think that the government has proceeded in the right direction. Even though this has been adopted, this has been in practice in the UK and in the US for quite some time now. This is the time that the government has adopted this in the pandemic times to provide relief to the MSME sector from their corporate financial distress. So without much ado, I will go into my share screen. Yeah, pre-pack insolvency resolution process is, as the name suggests itself, can you see this?
Yes, madam.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Yes,
So
yes, ma'am.
yeah, as the name suggests itself, it is a package. The insolvency resolution itself is packaged for the corporates which are within the definition of the MSME. This is particularly brought in for only MSME units, MSME corporates. And one of the main requirements is that it should be a corporate. But before we go into pre-pack, I just thought I will touch a little upon how this entire insolvency process came into place. Because if you see, as a country, we all know how the financial sector was, how the borrowers were, what was the psychology of the borrowers, what is the psychology of the lenders. And if you look at it, over the years, our processes have matured. But up to 2016, the NPA scenario was very, very bad in our country, and it was in such a manner that the banks were reeling under the NPA weight. The proportion of NPAs to the actual recoveries was very, very bad. So if you see how did this entire IBC evolve? See, earlier when the borrowers went to the banks for funding, it was once the borrowing happened, see, till they got the funds from the banks, the borrowers were behind the lenders asking them to give them some kind of a funding to carry on their business. But once the funding happened, what happened was the bankers were now behind the borrowers. It was a lender who was going behind the borrower, asking them to do the repayment. It was such a bad scenario in those days that, whatever were the measures, whatever there were multiple laws, what are the laws? There were multiple laws which were enacted by our government to do the recovery from these borrowers, but there was a failure across all these multiple laws. So what happened was the government at all various points in time appointed various committees to actually find a solution for this default crisis. I wouldn't even say NPA, because NPA was a terminology which came in after the Narasimhan committee came. But till then, it was the default which was happening by the borrowers for the funds which they have borrowed from the lenders. So the first committee was, all this is going to tell you how this the insolvency and bankruptcy code evolved. Why was it thought necessary to bring in this code? So the Tiwari committee formed in 1981. This was actually formed to address the industrial sickness which was hitting all the major industries in the country, which was resulting in the loss of production. And because there is a loss of production, see, ultimately in a country of our population density, it is very important that employment is provided to the citizens of the country. So this loss in production led to a direct loss in the employment. And once this loss in production and employment happens, then automatically the government's revenues also was decreasing, and there is a blockage of the funds. Because there's a loss of production, automatically the funds which the banks had lent out to the borrowers, that was blocked. So, and also if you see, there were these funds were being misused by the erring promoters. The promoters and all the others within the stakeholders within that ecosystem, they all were not repaying the money. And the BIFR, which was formed as a result of this, that also failed to fulfill this purpose, which was brought in. See, because the Tiwari committee brought in the Sikh Industrial Companies Act in 1981, and the BIFR, which was which was a fallout of the SICA, that also refused, could not fulfill the mandate for which the SICA was formed. So after the failure of the SICA and the Tiwari committee recommendations, Narasimhan committee was formed by the government in 1991. Narasimhan committee came up with this RDDBFI, which is the recovery of debts due to banks and financial institutions. Narasimhan committee recommended that, and Narasimhan committee brought in the DRT and DRAT. The Narasimhan committee was the committee which was responsible for bringing in the formation of the Debt Recovery Tribunal and the Debt Recovery Appellate Tribunal. They recommended this, and this was these tribunals were formed, I think, around 1994 to enable the recovery of whatever was dues from the borrowers. Then what happened after this, because even this wasn't very effective in the recovery mechanism, in 1998, again, Narasimhan committee gave another report. And in this report, what they did was they studied all the aspects for restructuring the banking and the financial systems, and to recommend the improvements in the efficiency and productivity of the financial systems. And they said that NPAs are the largest, NPAs is a biggest irritant to the banking industry, and this non-performing assets, which was pulling down the balance sheets of all the banks. And this, as a result of this committee, the SARFAESI came in. And after this again, the SARFAESI also was not all that successful, because even now, if you see, both SARFAESI and IBC both are working parallel. But in spite of that, the judicial delays in SARFAESI, the banking delays, judicial delays is much higher in SARFAESI when compared to the insolvency. Then what happened in 2015, the BLRC report was given. This BLRC report was actually given by Dr. Vishwanathan, T.K. Vishwanathan. And the BLRC report, actually what they did was they gave a formula for recovery of the debts due to the bank, and how to realize the debts which were due to the banking sector. And what was most most important objectives of the BLRC report was the lesser time in recovering the dues, because you and I, we know how the judicial systems work in this country. What is the time? There is such a huge time lag between the time when an issue is admitted in any judicial authority and it gets sorted out and gets pushed out of the system. Either there is no resolution, or if there is a resolution, it's a very, very delayed resolution of whatever is the issue which goes into the judicial system. So the BLRC report said we need to have a system, a process which is going to say ensure that there is lesser time involved. Then two, a loss of recovery. Normally what happens, the recovery of the amounts due was very, very minimal when compared to what is actually being lent out to the corporates. And two is, third one is the BLRC report said that there should be higher levels of debt financing across instruments to finance the corporates through various other means of instruments, not only specifically the borrowings from the bank. So the Banking Law Reforms Committee, So the Banking Law Reforms Committee gave the report in November 2015, and this was passed by the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha in May 2016, and the President's assent was given in 28 May 2016, and that is how the code also was born. So what happens is, here, if you see in Tiwari Committee, the creditor was always in control. Sorry, the debtor was always in control. So what happens is the debtor borrows the money till he borrows the money from the financier. He goes behind the financier, but once the money is borrowed, he disappears. In most of the cases, the borrower disappeared, or there was no repayment whatsoever which was forthcoming. And what happens? The bankers were going behind the borrowers, asking them to do the repayment. So what happens? They lend the money, but they're still going behind the borrowers to please repay the money. The control was only in the hands of the debtor. Even though they borrow the money, the control of the money, the assets created with the money, the purposes for which they borrowed the money, all that, the control was in the hands of the debtor. So this is the status at the Tiwari Committee in 1981. Whereas once this code was envisaged, this movement of control moved from, debtor in possession to creditor in control. The entire control, if you see, will now move from the debtor's hands into the creditor's hands. So this was the ethos of, new ethos for debt resolution. This is a very, up to 2016, this wasn't happening. But once 2016, with the dawn of the IBC regime, what happened was the entire scenario changed. Okay, the debt resolution, from a debtor in possession, it moved to creditor in control. So if you see, the BLRC report says the limited liability company is a contract between equity and debt. And as long as the debt obligations are met, equity owners have complete control, and creditors have no say in how the business is done. So actually what the BLRC report says is, actually what should happen is, when default takes place, control is supposed to transfer to the creditors and equity owners should have no say. But this was not the position as on 2015 November. Once there is a default, even if there is a default, control is still in the hands of the debtor and the creditors have no say. So this was the position up to 2015, and the IBC brought in a huge change into this ethos. So I told you that there were a number of laws. We are a country which has a surfeit of laws. We have so many, laws for so many things which we wouldn't even have known exist. So we had the Companies Act 1956, which dealt with liquidation and winding up of corporates. I am touching the laws only which are going to talk about the recovery of debts. So liquidation and winding up of corporates, which had to take place in the High Court. Through the SICA 1985, you had the rescue and rehabilitation of industrial undertakings, and it happened at the BIFR. But we already know that the BIFR failed because of the erring promoters. Then you have the RDDBFI in 1983, which is a recovery of debts due to banks and financial institutions, where debts of more than 10 lakhs, the financial institutions could approach the DRT and DRAT. Then you have the SARFAESI Act, where the enforcement of the secured security, SARFAESI is only for the secured creditors, where they can enforce that security, whatever is given by the debtor, at the DRT, and failing which they can go up to the DRAT. Then you have the individual insolvency. All these were for corporate borrowers and other borrowers. For individual insolvency, they had the Presidency Towns Insolvency Act and Provincial Insolvency Act 1920. Just see how old these laws were, 1909 and 1920. How exactly are they going to be relevant even today? But those were the only remedies which were available for people up to 2016. Then you have the partnerships. Again, partnership insolvency was dealt with only by the Presidency Towns Insolvency Act and the Provincial Insolvency Act. For corporates, it was revival and rehabilitation. We saw it will come only through SICA, to Companies Act 1956 and Companies Act 2013. Recovery of these debts by corporates was through the SARFAESI Act. SARFAESI Act is also again only if you have a secured debt. And if you want to liquidate the company, then you have the Companies Act 1956 and Companies Act 2013. Now, what is a general recovery process? Suppose you don't want to go into the judicial forums to recover the whatever is due to you, then you can go to the corporate, go to the financial institutions, ask them to do a CDR, ask them to do a debt restructuring, go into the JLF, go into the SDR, the strategic debt. That depends on your relationship, on the corporate's relationship with the banker and how they could actually, negotiate the bankers. Then you have the debt recovery. So before the IBC, what was the scenario? They had various legislations. We already saw the laws were in 1909 and 1920. They were archaic laws with outdated relevance. We don't have any kind of connection between the law which was enacted in 1909 and how is it exactly going to be, implemented at this point in time. They was more than centuries old, and all the loopholes in the existing laws were put to use by these erring promoters to actually not repay, to default on whatever is the loans which they have borrowed from the financial institutions, and non-recovery of dues. Creditors were unable to recover the dues from these borrowers, and it became a totally debtor-driven process. And actually, we all know as finance professionals, anything which is a debtor, especially when recovery of dues has to happen, it cannot be a debtors-driven process. More, it should be a creditor initiative. Creditor should be holding a higher position and getting, having a say in the recovery process. So, and we know how cumbersome, what are the long procedures which took place in the various high courts. And what happens is, in the official liquidator's office, the creditors rarely got the proceeds from the official liquidators. They barely got anything. The recovery was very, very, very minuscule percentage. And this asset stripping by the borrowers was a very common, very, very common occurrence. Borrowers very rarely, they did not wait for the creditors to come and initiate proceedings. By the time the creditors realized that this, we need to collect from these borrowers, they would have stripped the entire, unit entity out of all the assets, and there will only be a shell. And as a result of which, there is going to be a depletion in the value of the assets. So if you see the balance sheet itself, it's going to be a very skewed balance sheet, whatever is being presented by these borrowers. And if there were any immovable properties which, on which, which were given as security and against which the financial institutions were going to recover through SARFAESI, then they found that it was riddled with litigations. So, whatever was the due diligence which was actually supposed to be done by the financial institutions at the time of issuing of these big ticket loans, they were not so properly done. Due care was not taken, due diligence was not done, and it was later found that these immovable properties were riddled with litigations. So this gave, all this laid the basis for the formation of this insolvency and bankruptcy code. But why was this need? One, recovery of debts. Too little, too late. See, the moment a banker is going to lend money to a corporate, that is one of the, revenues of that particular financial institution. And if there is going to be a recovery which is too little, or if it's going to happen too late, what is the, the basic premise on which these financial institutions are operating itself is lost. The money gets stuck in the market. The money doesn't get recovered, and the debt market gets stunted and scared. What happens is, see, because of this non-recovery and because of the accountability which was placed on these, bankers and other people who were lending for not recovering the money, what happened was ultimately whomsoever was a financial institution who was lending to corporates, they gave these credits. They gave I would say a loan only to a person who was of standing, whom they were confident was going to be able to repay them, who they felt had enough of a backing to repay them. So as a result of this, a normal businessman who did not have any assets, what happened? All these bankers gave funds only on the basis of a security, and any new-gen entrepreneur will not have any kind of a security to give to the bank for accessing any funds. So the debt market became very stunted. There was no growth at all. And then what happened was, this impacted the global index of ease of doing business. You see, ease of doing business is something which is nowadays being measured to, to enable a country to enter into the global market. So as your global index of ease of doing business increases, automatically there are more foreigners, foreign funds which are going to come in, foreign industries which are going to come in. So all this and the balance sheet test event. See, what happened was, we all know how the balance sheets were prepared a few years back. There was no accountability. There is no asset backing in the balance sheet. We all know when we go and take insolvency corporate CD's balance sheet, we will say there is no working, there is no stocks, there are no assets. What happens? The CD, the promoters would have stripped the corporate. The there will not be, the books will be cooked up. There will not be any, inventory within the organization. There will not be any work in progress. But whatever is the stock statement which they give to the bank will be a very robust stock statement, and the balance sheets which were not checked for this by the creditors, and it was not liquidity driven, and hence there was no early warning system. See, wherever the bankers have been smart and have been able to find, go through in-depth analysis of the balance sheet, they were able to detect that there is something going to happen within this particular industry. There is something going to happen to this particular corporate, for which they can either help the corporate come out of it, or they can come out of it. So this early warning system for resolution was not available. So it was on the basis of all this that the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code actually evolved and emerged. That is this alarming NPA crisis which we spoke about. The balance sheets were literally sagging. The balance sheets of all the nationalized and private sector banks now were literally sagging under the weight of this NPAs, and all the recourses had failed. The SICA, the BIFR, the SARFACI, the DRTs, the DRATs are sagging again under the weight of the cases which they are handling, and the recourse to which the government thought is going to enable collection or cleaning up of the NPAs in the balance sheets has not happened. And the BLRC report gave a solution for this in the time manner of the IBC. So what happened once IBC emerged from debtor in possession, the entire stakeholders thing moved to creditor in control. And two, IBC, the insolvency process which was brought in a time base. It is timeline. 180 days is what was envisaged earlier. So there is a low time to resolve. If you do not complete it within that time, then the company automatically moved into liquidation, and from liquidation, you have again only 1 year to complete the entire process and wind up the company. So this is a law which is going to put India on par with the developed nations and increase the rating as per the ease of doing business index. So if you go into the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, you will see in the preamble itself that the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code was brought in as a time bound. It is a market mechanism. Okay, it is a market mechanism. It doesn't, because the resolution plans which are going to be called for are going to be called for from the market, or the compromise and arrangement is going to happen from the market with the public information which is going to be shared. So it is a time bound. Again, time bound, I told you 180 days, and now to the you can have one extension of 90 days. Mandatory period is 180 days. You will have one extension of 90 days. And if there are any judicial delays or any other delays, the entire process has to be completed within 330 days. That is the CIRP, the Corporate Insolvency Resolution Process. And for liquidation, it is going to be again a period of 1 year. So it is a time-bound market mechanism for reorganization and insolvency resolution of persons in financial distress. So whomsoever is in financial distress, for them, this particular code was brought in, where if you see maximization of value of the assets of the persons. Persons in this case are the persons within the CIRP ecosystem, that is your corporate debtors, who may be a company, who may be an LLP, who may be a partnership or an individual, offer maximization of the value of assets of all these persons. And the most important one is to promote entrepreneurship, because once there is a recovery which is happening on these defaults, automatically the liquidity in the hands of the financial institutions increases, and automatically, because that increases, they will be willing to lend it to more eligible borrowers. So it in turn, goes to promote entrepreneurship, enhances the availability of credit. I told you how it comes, and balance the interests of all the stakeholders. All the stakeholders in this instance would be the lenders. Then you have the government. You have the creditors of that particular corporate debtor. All these people's interests are being balanced by this Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. So how do you resolve this corporate stress? See, I've been speaking to you about CIRP. CIRP is the Corporate Insolvency Resolution Process, which is what is currently happening since 2016. This is the process through which the insolvency of corporates is being handled. And how does it happen? The resolution happened calling for a resolution plan from any other third party, a corporate, or it goes into liquidation. Suppose this resolution plan does not happen, does not materialize, or is rejected either by the COC or by the NCLT, because as far as this IBC is concerned, the judicial authority is the NCLT. So if it is rejected by NCLT, then what happens is this entire process goes into liquidation. And I told you, from liquidation, within a year, the liquidation has to be done. Liquidation estate is determined. Whatever has to be sold will be sold. Whatever has to be collected will be collected. And the corporate will be wound up after the distribution of the assets to the stakeholders. So this is how the CIRP happens. Now we come to what is PPIRP. This is what was happening till now. But now, since August 11th or 12th, PPIRP has been noticed. The pre-packaged insolvency resolution process has been notified. And how does this one resolve the insolvency? Again, by a resolution plan, or it closes without resolution. And in some cases, it will move into CIRP. And again, from CIRP, it will go into liquidation and it will be wound up. So this is how the corporate stress. By corporate, I mean only the companies and the LLPs. These are the two entities which can avail of this CIRP and the PPIRP. So now we will come into MSME stress resolution. See, we all know that what happens. I'm going straight into the PPIRP. Where PPIRP was actually brought in by the government to mitigate the stress which the MSME sector was undergoing during the pandemic period. And we all know, as a country, as an economy for our country, MSMEs are very, very critical, because MSMEs contribute almost more than 30% to the economy of the country. They are the backbone. We are an agrarian economy, where parallelly MSMEs are also the backbone of this economy, and they contribute to more than 30% of the economy of the country. And if you see, as an employer, MSME sector employs more than 100 million people in the country. So for any country, we all know, to economically develop, what happens is the people of the country should be employed gainfully. And this gainful employment is again coming only through MSME, because it is the largest sector after agriculture. As we are an agrarian economy, it goes without saying agriculture is the largest employer, but MSME is fast catching up with the agrarian agricultural sector to provide employment to more than 100 million people. So why this? Why do we need to talk about stress resolution? All of us are still in the pandemic period, and we all know what a gory impact that pandemic had. And apart from the impact on the health and the lives of the people, the impact on the economy was actually extremely bad, and for the country to recover from that is still taking time. And MSMEs, you and I know, even today when we go walk across the roads, we'll see many small shops, small companies, small these micro sector industries, they have all shut shop. If you go, a small eatery which was doing flourishing business, that is also shut. Even in my own place, much to my surprise, there was a restaurant which was more than 50-60 years old, which was running on the main road in our place. One day we saw it had shut. It was shut down due to the pandemic. There were no. So you see how easily the distress happens to these corporates. So this stress resolution due to COVID-19, the government was apart from announcing many incentives, many schemes to revive the MSME sector, they also brought in this particular pre-package insolvency process for the stress resolution of the MSME sectors due to COVID-19. So because of the unique nature of their businesses and simpler corporate structures, the process which is quicker, which is cost effective, and maximizing the value outcomes for all the stakeholders, because ultimately we all know it is a small cycle. They're all, most of these are small mom and pop shows, or with 2 or 3 partners or 2 or 3 directors. They may be employing around 10 or 20 employees. So you need to maximize the value outcome for all the stakeholders in the least disruptive manner. So if luckily, fortunately, the MSME was able to withhold the stress of the pandemic and was continuing business, but they're still having some financial distress, then that distress should be resolved in such a manner that there is no disruption to the continuity of the business, and that there are no job losses within that particular stress. So this is the main intention of the government of bringing in this PPIRP, which is the pre-packaged process. So before we go into the process, we'll see what is the definition which was given in 2020. The definition was amended, and now it is a composite criteria. We all know, as professionals, will be dealing composite criteria of investment in plant and machinery. So manufacturing enterprises and enterprises rendering service. For a micro industry, it is investment in plant and machinery or equipment not more than 1 crore, and but the annual turnover not more than 5 crores. Or for small scale industries, investment in plant and machinery is not more than 10 crores and annual turnover not more than 50 crores. And for medium industries, investment in plant and machinery is not more than 50 crores and turnover not more than 250 crores. So all these all entities which come under this classification of the micro, small and medium enterprises, if they are facing a financial distress, they can opt. It is again an option of that particular entity to go in either for PPIRP or for CIRP. So what is this prepackaged insolvency process? It is available as an alternative option. I told you, they can either go in for CIRP or they can go for PPIRP. And here, the government has notified that the minimum default is rupees 10 lakhs. So earlier, if you see under IBC, when IBC was introduced, the minimum default was 1 lakh to 1 crore. So any default from 1 lakh up to 1 crore, the CIRP could be initiated against that particular CD. But during the pandemic in March 2020, the government did not want all the corporates to go through this, insolvency process, because a lot of these corporates were not able to meet up to their financial commitments. So the government brought in a notification saying that the minimum default to initiate a corporate insolvency process is 1 crore. And they also said you cannot initiate this CIRP between the period of March 25 to March 2020 to 2021. So this was extended. So what they did was they brought in this notification saying that for prepackaged insolvency, the minimum default has to be 10 lakhs. So if a MSME has a default of 10 lakhs, then they have the option of going into PPIRP. And the default, see, this is also one very unique thing, because they have said that between 25th March to 24th March, no insolvency process can be initiated. The entire process, IBC itself, was suspended. So during the suspension, if there was any default by the MSME sector during this period of 25th March to 24th March 2021, then the MSME's entity had the option of opting for the PPIRP. So even if the default is 1 crore for which CIRP is available, then they can move even to CIRP. So what is the features of the pre-pack insolvency resolution process? One, it has the rigor and discipline of the CIRP. That is, we all know CIRP means there is a discipline within the entire process. The 180 days has got to be followed. Strict timelines as per regulation 40A needs to be followed, and there is no way in which the timelines can be delayed. And if there is a delay in meeting the timelines, then automatically the approval from the adjudicating authority has got to be obtained. And apart from that, within the IBC framework, there are 4 pillars. One is the IP, which is you and me who undergo the course and we practice as insolvency professionals. Then you have the IPA, that is the insolvency professional agencies who register and monitor these IPAs and IUs, the information utilities, where the information regarding the defaults are, they act as a repository for this information. Then you have the NCLTs, the adjudicating authority, and the 4th is the IBBI. So what happens is, for this thing, the features is it has a rigor and discipline of CIRP. So for the for CIRP to be successful, you have to actually comply with the timelines. I told you in regulation 48, 180 days is the period within which the insolvency has got to be completed. And this discipline, if you see, is also there in the pre-pack insolvency process, which has to be completed within a period of 120 days. And here in PPIRP, in CIRP, the creditor takes control. Once the application is admitted by NCLT and CIRP starts, the creditor takes control of the process. Whereas in PPIRP, there is a blend of debtor in possession with creditor in control. It is neither fully private nor a fully public process. In CIRP, it becomes a fully public process, whereas in PPIRP, part of it up to the time when it is admitted by NCLT, it is private, and after that it becomes a public process. And then if a company is eligible under section 29A, it can submit a base resolution plan. See, PPIRP is actually envisaging the promoters themselves controlling the company after the initiation of the PPIRP. In CIRP, what happens once the application gets admitted by NCLT, the corporate debtor loses control over his company. All the powers of the board get suspended. Whereas in PPIRP, it is not the case. If the company is eligible under section 29A, I'll tell you what is 29A, it can submit a base resolution plan to take over the company again. Then what happens? The same as in CIRP, it safeguards the rights of all the stakeholders. So all the people within the ecosystem of that PPIRP get all their rights, protected, and it does not yield if there is no resolution plan. So if there is no base resolution plan itself, then there is no point in actually doing this PPIRP. So what is the eligibility for this pre-packaged insolvency process? There should have been a default of at least 10 lakhs. So unless and until there is a default of 20 lakhs, there is no possibility of initiating this. And two is also, it should be a corporate structure. It should be it should have a corporate structure or an LLP structure to be eligible to file a PPIRP. And it should be eligible to submit a resolution plan under section 29A. Section 29A is, was introduced in CIRP after the, big ticket cases like SR Steel, where the original promoters of the company tried a backdoor entry into the to take over the company because, they have diverted the funds, they have mismanaged the corporate, but finally after coming into insolvency, they'll come back and say, no, I want to take over the company. So section 29A was brought in to prevent the backdoor entry of the promoters to come and give a resolution plan. There is a set of disqualifications of the person whomsoever is going to submit a resolution plan, like he cannot be an undischarged insolvent. He cannot have his DIN cannot be blocked. He cannot be an NPA. There are a number of sub clauses in section 29A1, which will talk about who and all cannot give a resolution plan. So similarly, if this company which is in PPIRP is going to submit a resolution plan, he should be eligible to submit the resolution plan. If there is no eligibility, then he cannot submit it. He has not undergone a PPIRP during the 3 years preceding the initiation date. What is the initiation date? The date on which this application for PPIRP is accepted by the NCLT. It has not completed a CIRP. So they should not have undergone a CIRP process during the 3 years preceding the initiation date. He is not undergoing a CIRP. He cannot undergo a CIRP and say, no, I want to opt for PPIRP, and is not required to be liquidated by an order under section 33 of the code. Section 33 of the code is a section by virtue of which a corporate debtor is ordered into insolvency because of the failure of resolution plan, or because no resolution plan was received for that corporate, or 180 days was completed. So what happens is these criteria need to be fulfilled for a corporate MSME in the MSME sector to apply for PPIRP. And most importantly, they should attach a copy of the Udyam registration or a certificate of proof of investment in plant and machinery as required under MSME Act. That is that section 7 which I was talking about. So we will go to the process. Processes in PPIRP, it is pre-initiation. There will be two parts to this. It's a two-pronged approach. One is the pre-initiation approach, and two is the post-initiation. Initiation in this case, see, in CIRP, if you see, you have section 7, section 9, and section 10 are the sections through which the CIRP is initiated. Section 7 is by the financial creditor, and Section 8 by the operational creditor, and 10 is by the corporate debtor himself. Whereas in PPIRP, if you see, only the corporate debtor will initiate the process. And in this process, it will be a two-pronged process, which is pre-initiation and post-initiation. We'll see, we already saw in pre-initiation, it would be more of a private process, and post initiation it becomes a public process. So we'll see what is the process flow. We already saw that there should be an eligibility to apply for the PPIRP. We saw what is the eligibility. One, he should have committed a default of at least 10 lakhs. Two, he should be eligible to give a resolution plan under Section 29A. He's not undergone for 3 years. The PPIRP not undergone CIRP for 3 years previously. He is not undergoing a CIRP and not ordered to be liquidated under Section 23. So what happens is, he should be eligible to apply for the PPIRP, and then there should be a mutual understanding between the debtors and the creditors. So what happens is, in the pre-initiation period, when we talk about mutual understanding, the debtor himself, that is the MSME CD, the corporate itself, will go and have a discussion with the financial creditors, who should be unrelated. It should be unrelated financial creditors, and he'll discuss with them and say, I'm going to go in for a PPIRP. It is rather like, something similar to this OTS. Then you have the list of creditors. This corporate will prepare the list of creditors to whom it owes the money, and it will give a declaration. It has to give a declaration from the majority of the directors or partners that if you see all this, it will be similar to the voluntary liquidation process under Section 59 of the code. Then you have the shareholder resolutions. In case it is a corporate structure, they have to give a special resolution from the shareholders approving the PPIRP. Then consent. This majority of the unrelated financial creditors have to agree for the initiation of the PPIRP. They should say, yes, we are okay with this. You can go ahead. Sorry. And then the resolution professional. Here, if you see, the resolution professional will also give his consent, and along with the application form, we'll see it in the next slide. The resolution professional will be appointed, and this resolution professional has to give a report on the entire process, and whatever is the resolution plan, the IM, which is given by the corporate debtor. And then application is given to the AA, that is the adjudicating authority for admission. After that, what happens, once this application is admitted by the AA, this resolution professional will prepare an updated list of claims and give it to the file it with the adjudicating authority. He will get the preliminary information memorandum. See, actually, in the case of CIRP, what happens? The resolution professional will only do all this, whereas in the case of PPIRP, all this is going to be done only by the corporate debtor. It will only be supervised by the resolution professional. So the preliminary information memorandum is also prepared by the corporate debtor, and then what happens, based on this preliminary information memorandum, a base resolution plan is prepared by the corporate debtor himself about how he is going to take over the company. So this is the process flow. Now we'll see this process in detail. What happens? Now there is going to be a mutual understanding. I already told you there's going to be a mutual understanding between the corporate debtor and the creditors to the corporate debtor. That is the for seeking the before going and filing an application. This particular corporate applicant has got to get the approval for filing itself to from the creditors, from the unrelated financial creditors. It is not only creditors, all the creditors. If you see, always in the IBC, in the insolvency process, it is only the financial creditors who are given more importance, because the financial creditors are the people who are lending the money to these corporates to do the business. So even if you go into the liquidation process under section 53 waterfall thing, the secured financial creditors are the people who are on the top of the list before, after the insolvency professional cost. So what happens is there should be a mutual understanding between the corporate applicant and the unrelated financial creditors of the corporate debtor. That is, they should not be related parties of the CD. And if the CD has no related parties, then what happens is, or if the financial creditors are all related parties, then the applicant will convene meetings of unrelated operational creditors. Only in the case of no financial creditors will the operational creditors even come into the picture. And these are operational creditors, they should also be unrelated, will perform the same duties as the unrelated financial creditors. So what happens is, as usual in the CIRP process, they have to serve the notice of meeting to the unrelated creditors within 5 days. And this notice will give all the details, and the applicant will, along with this, enclose the list of creditors. So this list of creditors will be enclosed when the meeting for the unrelated financial creditors is called. And what will happen, he will say that these are the creditors and this is the amount due to them. Along with the notice of the meeting, this will be enclosed and sent to the creditors. And also he will give an identification of the IP, of the insolvency professional, who is going to act as a resolution professional for this entire PPIRP. And what will he do along with that? He will have to see this resolution professional who is going to be proposed has job in 3 parts of the entire process. Okay, so he will be doing his activities during the pre-initiation period. Then again, post-initiation, again, he will have to do the job. And in case he needs to run the corporate debtor, he will have to have the capacity to run that corporate debtor also at any point in time. Whereas if you see in the CIRP process, the resolution professional has only what would I say, takes over the company immediately on the process being initiated. So they will identify this person, and this along with the application, the consent of the insolvency professional will also be given. And then what happens, the majority of the directors and partners of the CD will have to make a declaration that they will file an application, that they can file an application to initiate the process, initiate the PPIRP, and they should file it within the timeline. And that, they have to give a declaration saying that this entire process is not being done to defraud any creditors, and that the name of the insolvency professional has been approved by the creditors. And what happens? They have to give a shareholder resolution. We already saw they have to give a special resolution, or at least 3/4 of the total number of the partners of the CD, in case it is an LLP, should pass a resolution approving the filing of the application, initiating the PPIRP. Then what happens? The the CD will have to prepare a base resolution plan in accordance with the requirements of this thing. Then what happens? This base resolution plan and this list of creditors, all this will be scrutinized by the resolution professional, and he will give a report on the entire process, because ultimately what has to be seen is that this entire process is not going to defraud any of the creditors. Then after this, after the RP is convinced about the entire process, he will file an application to the adjudicating authority for admission. And after that, again, what he will do is the proposed RP will will prepare, after the application is admitted by the adjudicating authority, he will give an updated list of claims. And then this updated list of claims will again be given only by the CD. It will not be prepared by the RP. RP will only verify. And then they will give the preliminary information memorandum and the base resolution plan. So after all this mutual understanding, list of creditors, RP identification and all has happened, and up till here, the adjudicating authority will, the application is filed with the AA, and the AA, suppose there is no issue in the application, the AA will admit the application. So up to this, it is pre-initiation. From here, it is post-initiation. So the AA is admitting the application, which is the date on which this process is going to commence, and this is the day from which the 120 days is going to be computed. After this application is admitted, the resolution professional will constitute the committee of creditors. The committee of creditors is the unrelated financial creditors whom we saw. And then what will happen is, the day that this is admitted, a moratorium is declared. A moratorium is declared by the adjudicating authority itself, and no person can initiate any cases for recovery or otherwise against the corporate debtor. And as usual, how in CARP a public announcement is made, here also a public announcement will be made. And in case all this is not taking place, then the role of the RP ceases. So the RP will constitute the committee of creditors. See, normally what happens in a CIRP process, the control of the corporate debtor moves over to the resolution professional who is appointed, the IRP who is appointed. Whereas in this case, the control and management of the affairs of the CD will continue to vest with the corporate applicant, that is the board of directors or partners of the CD. And if you see the CIRP, it will say, the duties of the RP, it will say that they have to protect and preserve the value of the property of the CD. Whereas in PPIRP, the duty to protect and preserve the value of the property lies only with the corporate applicant, and they have to manage their operations as a going concern. And the promoters and their employees and their personnel and partners, they should exercise and discharge their contractual or statutory duties and obligations in relation to the CD. So what happens now, this within 2 days of this appointment, this CD will submit a detailed list of claims along with the security interest and other guarantees and other details, and also a preliminary information memorandum. This preliminary information memorandum will contain the details to prepare a, the base resolution plan. And then what happens, the RP will make a public announcement of the in case the base resolution plan is going to impair the value of the operation creditors. So operational creditors need to be repaid. So suppose it's going to impair the value for the operational creditors, what happens is, and a public notice is again given by the announcement is made by the resolution professional within 2 days, and he will call for alternate plans. He will give the basis of evaluation. If you go to a CIRP process, an evaluation matrix is given. Here the basis of evaluation is disclosed and alternate plans are invited, and the best alternate plan will be selected. Okay, so now if the best alternate plan is not better than the BRP, that is here the base resolution plan, or they challenge each other, then it will go to the COC, and the COC may approve any winning plan. Or if there is the COC does not approve, then the pre-pack is going to be closed without any resolution. Suppose the alternate plan is better than the base resolution plan, the COC can approve the best alternate plan, and they will if it is it will go and the plan will get submitted to the adjudicating authority. What happens in the case of a CIRP? If the resolution plan is submitted and it is approved by the COC, then that resolution plan is again submitted to the adjudicating authority. The adjudicating authority will approve the plan, and then what happens is the process, CIRP process closes. Similar to that, if the COC here is going to approve the base alternate plan, best alternate plan, it will the RP will submit the plan to the adjudicating authority by within 90 days for approval. Suppose the COC does not approve the best alternate plan, then the pre-pack again closes without any resolution. Suppose no plan is received, the RP is going to make a public announcement, give the basis of evaluation and calling for alternate plans, but no plan is received. If no plan is received, then the COC may say, okay, fine, let us go with whatever is given by the CD himself, and they may approve the BRP. And if there is no plan, the COC does not approve the BRP, then again, the PPIRP closes without any resolution. But if they approve, then again, that resolution plan is submitted to the adjudicating authority for approval. And once this is approved, then the entire process gets closed. Here again, now if the base resolution plan is impairing the check is done whether by the RP, whether the BRP is going to impair the operation creditors. If the RP decides no, it is not impairing, then the RP will present this plan to the COC and they will approve the BRP, and it goes again to the adjudicating authority for approval, and the pre-pack is closed. So this is the entire process, and during this entire period from 0 to 90 days, the moratorium has been declared. Now I'll quickly go through what are the list of responsibilities for the CD, the corporate debtor, the resolution professional, and the creditors. One is, see, in this case, that is in the case of PPIRP, whatever was done by the resolution professional in CIRP will be done by the corporate applicant in this case. So one, they have to identify the creditors, both the financial creditors and the operation creditors. They have to distinguish between the related and unrelated creditors. They have to prepare a list. This is all done by the applicant. Please remember that. They have to prepare a list of creditors and the amount due to each of them. And in case there is any change, then again change it. Then they have to convene and facilitate the meeting of the creditors, seeking approval for appointment of an IPSRP. So this particular corporate applicant will decide to take somebody as a resolution professional. They have to get the appointment of that resolution professional approved at the meeting. So they have to call for a meeting of the committee of creditors. The corporate applicant again has to make a declaration from the directors and partners. And we also saw they have to pass a special resolution and they have to prepare the base resolution plan. Now, what is the responsibility of the resolution professional? One is, when somebody asks you, you have to give your consent to act as the RP. And then the second major thing is they have to ascertain classes of creditors, if any. So there is this concept called class of creditors where, in case there are any particular clause as per section 21(6), if you go and see, if there is anyone who's any particular class of creditors requires a representative, an authorized representative needs to be given. So for an authorized representative to be given in the public announcement itself, the names of 3 insolvency professionals will be given, and the creditors can choose whomsoever they want. Then they have to collect all the information relating to the assets, liabilities, finances, and operations of the CD, and they have to submit a report. Here we saw they have to submit a report. Report of RP is what we saw here. This report is what they have to give. Submit a report saying that, yes, they can go in for a PPIRP, and that whatever is the base resolution plan which was given, it conforms to all the requirements. Then the RP has to make a public announcement. He has to appoint registered valuers. All this will come similar to what is there in the CIRP. Confirm the list of claims. See, list of claims in this case will be given by the applicant and he has to confirm it. What is the responsibility of the creditor? the basic thing, they have to approve the insolvency professional who has to act as the RP. They have to select if there is authorized representative, they have to make the selection of the authorized representative. Then they have to approve the filing of the application. All this, the applicant is deciding to file, but the approval for the filing should be given by the creditor. Then they have to assist the RP to finalize a list of claims, consider the base resolution plan, and allow opportunity for revision. In case there is any room for revision of the base resolution plan, the creditors have to give an approval for that, an opportunity to the corporate applicant to revise the base resolution plan and approve the eligibility criteria. Now, suppose the BRP is not acceptable, we said that the RP has to give a public announcement calling for better resolution plans. So that eligibility criteria is decided by this creditor. So again, this corporate applicant has to convene and facilitate meetings of creditors seeking approval. So we already saw, unless and until the approval is obtained, they cannot file. Prepare a declaration regarding avoidance transactions. Avoidance transactions is something which we all would have seen in CIRP. If there is a preferential transaction which is undertaken, or an undervalued transaction, or a fraudulent transaction, or an extortionate transaction, so the applicant himself has to say, no, I have not diverted any funds. There is no fraud in my country. There is no extortionate transactions. There is no any undervalued transactions. They have to give the declaration. Whereas in the case of a CIRP, it was the RP who had to determine these transactions. They have to prepare the audited financial statements for the last 2 financial years and provisional financial statements for the current financial year. And they have to file an application for initiation of the PPIRP. And they have to prepare the initial information memorandum. So the RP, what does he have to do? He has to constitute the COC once the application is admitted and convene its meeting and chair the meetings. Even in CIRP, it's the RP who convenes and chairs the meetings. Submit this IM which has been prepared to the members of the COC. And if the base resolution plan is not acceptable, they have to invite prospective applicants to submit a resolution plan. They have to conduct the process, the entire process they have to conduct, and also for the improvement of the resolution plan. Present the resolution plan, which is most acceptable, compliant resolution plan, to the COC for their evaluation and approval. And whatever is approved by the COC, it will be presented to the EAA along with the compliance certificate and submit. Once this resolution plan is submitted and accepted, then automatically he has to submit an application for termination, because the COC has already approved the base resolution plan. So what is the responsibilities of the creditor? They have to approve the basis of evaluation of the resolution plan. They have to approve the significantly better resolution plan, which is most acceptable to them. They have to approve that. Approve the tick size. What is the size of the resolution plan which is going to meet all the parameters? And then they have to specify the parameters for the improvement of process, such as they have to identify what is the better plan, what is the time limit, and what is the iteration process. And again, when you come back to responsibilities, we already saw here, they are preparing the preliminary information memorandum. The applicant again has to prepare. In this case, I told you in CIRP, everything is done by the RP. Here, everything is done by the applicant. He has to prepare the list of claims and update it as and when required. Submit the information memorandum and list of claims and the base resolution plan to the RP. In PPIRP, it is a CD who is going to manage the affairs as a going concern and preserve and protect the value of the property and participate in the process to improve the base resolution plan. Here again, the RP has to form an opinion. The CD will give a declaration. The RP has to form an opinion and make a determination about the avoidance transactions and file applications. They have to attend the meetings of the members, the board of directors, committee, or partners of the CD. They have to monitor the management. Here, the management is done by the CD, but they have to monitor the management and report to the COC in the event of breach of any obligations by the board of directors or partners of the CD. And suppose the adjudicating authority moves the management of the CD to the RP, then the RP has to manage the affairs of the CD. And the creditor, what do they have to do? They have to approve all the resolution plans which are provided, presented to them by the resolution professional, and choose the best among them. And they can also decide and say that the CD is mismanaging the corporate, so the management is going to go into the RP, and the RP will they will file an application with the adjudicating authority. Or if they are not happy, they can move to initiate a CIRP process in respect of the CD. So these are the sections and the timelines. So the date of commencement is T, and it has to be completed within 120 days. So what happens? Submission of the claims within 2 days and public announcement within 2 days. Valuers are appointed within 3 days. The COC is constituted within 7 days. First meeting of COC is within 14 days. IM is also within 14 days. And if this base resolution plan is not acceptable, they have to give a public notice within 21 days. They will get plans from other parties within 36 days. And they have to evaluate and approve it within 89 days. That is within the 30 days, from 89 days from this. And then within 13 days of commencement of PPIRP, they have to form the opinion on the transactions, the avoidance transactions, which I told you is the PUF transactions. And then they have to file an application. See, the declaration is given by the CD, but the RP has to make a determination and file an application to the adjudicating authority within 45 days and make a determination. First is forming. If you see in CIRP also, it will be 105 days, 75 days, all these days will be given there. Similar to that, or by the 135th day in CIRP, they will file here. By the 60th day, it has to be filed. And then the COC approved resolution plan has to be filed within 90 days, and the resolution plan will be approved by the adjudicating authority within 120 days. So this is how the entire pre-packaged IRP is going to get closed under this particular code IBC. They have introduced a new chapter called as chapter 3A, and the sections are from section 54C to 54L. I haven't covered the sections because I thought I don't need to actually burden you with the sections now. But from 54C to 54L, and now that the rules and regulations have also been notified, and on August 11th, the presidential assent, it has been passed in the parliament. So this is active now. So whomsoever of your clients needs is under financial distress and needs a resolution, you can always suggest to them to go in for this PPIRP. Okay, so I will hand over the floor to the organizers now.
Thank you, madam. Thank you for your deliberate speech on pre-packaged insurance resolution plan.
Yeah.
Sir, Ranjit garu, Sir Reddy garu, any questions, sir? Hello, members, any questions regarding this today's topic? No one respond, madam.
If there are any questions later, I don't mind it taking it on WhatsApp, or you can forward it to me. I will.
Okay, madam. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for cooperation. Thank you, madam. Thank you very much for your deliberate lecture on the resolution plan. Thank you on behalf of Guntur branch. Thank you for accepting our invitation and giving lecture. Thank you, madam. Thank you.
Yeah. Good evening. Yes. Good evening, sir. Good evening.
He is the chairman, madam.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Just completed the meeting. We came from Ranjini, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. My pleasure.
Handovering proceedings to the chairman.
Yeah. My pleasure to come to the Guntur branch, sir.
Thank you,
Yeah,
ma'am. Thank you.
physically you should present, ma'am. Next time.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, on behalf of the Guntur branch, thank you very much, man. And to the today's chief guest also, we are very much thankful to Ranjit sir for sparing his valuable time, and Changal Reddy sir, RCM of Guntur branch. Thank you very much, sir. Namaste.
Namaste,
Yeah.
sir. Thank you.
Ma'am.
And all the participants also.
Yeah, thank
thanks.
you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you.
you.
Bye.